Today on Up Front, the race for governor is once again a dead heat. Why are we seeing movement in the polls, and how did the candidates do in their final debate? We'll ask two of the panelists in the recent debates, WISN 12 political reporter Kent Wainscott and Wisconsin Public Radio Capitol reporter Shawn Johnson. Then he's been Wisconsin's Secretary of State for more than 3 decades. Why Democrat Doug LaFollette wants to serve yet another term.
Covering the issues important to Wisconsin. This is Up Front with Mike Goucher.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Up Front. Just a couple of weeks ago, it looked like Republican incumbent Scott Walker might be opening up a lead in the race for governor. A Marquette University Law School poll showed Walker up 5 points on Democratic challenger Mary Burke among likely voters. But Wednesday, a new poll came out, and it showed the race is a dead heat, with Walker and Burke tied at 47% among likely voters. The two faced off in their second and final debate Friday night in Milwaukee, and we're talking about all of this now, these developments, with our political roundtable. WISN 12 political reporter Kent Wainscott and Wisconsin Public Radio Capitol correspondent Shawn Johnson. Thanks to both of you for being with us today. And let's talk about the debates now being over. Your impressions of the two candidates in these two, the only two debates. Shawn, I'll begin with you.
I don't know. I think sometimes we're too close to it, seeing these candidates as we have for quite a while now. I turn to some of the national reporters that come in here to cover these debates, and their impression was that what they heard from the debates was largely what they heard from these candidates in their 30-second commercials. I mean, they've both gotten to be very disciplined candidates. They don't like to veer from anything that's safe, and so most of the time you saw that in these debates. And the couple times that you didn't, maybe that was a message that went on a few days.
Yeah. Ken, what did you think? Any change, actually, in their performance between debate one and the second debate?
I thought the most noticeable change between the two debates was with Governor Walker. In the first debate, he took a lot of heat afterward from people who said, look, he didn't answer a lot of the questions specifically. He was challenged by the panel a few times to be more specific in his responses. In the second debate, he was very specific in answering some of the questions, almost to a fault at some time, and using a lot of numbers that may have gone past the viewers, the voters who are watching this. But I do think that the candidates both accomplished what they set out to do in both of the debates, and that was to maintain their position, perhaps run out the clock, but certainly not to make any mistakes or not come away with any noticeable flaw, something that could show up in a campaign ad over the past couple of weeks.
I'm not sure there were memorable moments, at least in this second debate, but there were themes that we heard. And the governor didn't waste any time jumping on the latest jobs news, Shawn. He went right after it, right off the bat.
He's gone through quite an evolution on this issue. I mean, when he was initially a candidate for office, he was happy talking about monthly job numbers. During the recall, backed away from that and was saying we have to really look at these quarterly job numbers. They're the best. He wasn't, had no problem, I guess, going back to the monthly numbers, though. Right. It's a nice debate because the last set that's come out before the election for September are good. And so he wasn't worried about any nuance on those tonight or talking about the wide margin of error or anything like that. He was talking about those numbers just as the month before the Burke campaign had been talking about a monthly report that was bad.
Do you think this is helpful, this back and forth on the numbers, Ken, on whether it's jobs or whether it's the budget, a surplus or a deficit? Is it helpful to viewers, or is it just flat out confusing?
I think it's confusing to a lot of people, but as you saw in the Marquette poll, this is a dead even race, and all but 4% of the voters have already decided. They're going to look at those numbers, I think. The voters are going to look at those numbers and hear what they want to hear. They're hearing the spin from each of the campaigns in these ads, and they were hearing that in the debates as well. But even the candidates recognize jobs is the issue that they need to be talking about. The one line that came from the Eau Claire debate that Mary Burke immediately used in the second debate was Governor Walker's remark about we don't have a jobs problem. She rolled that out almost immediately.
So, Shawn, you were on the first panel of journalists asking questions in the first debate. You were on the second one. Each debate had its own feel. You had one debate in Eau Claire, the questions were quite different. You had one in Milwaukee, the questions were quite different. For people sitting at home, not unintentional, was it?
No, not unintentional. I mean, I think they wanted to have a Milwaukee focus in the Milwaukee market here. There was maybe less of a western Wisconsin focus in the first debate, even though it was in Eau Claire. But yeah, I mean, you did end up between the two debates with a variety of questions, and yet because we only have two debates and because of time constraints, there's some pretty big issues that were not addressed.
You said you had a question. You want to talk about vouchers, the future of the voucher program.
We were both talking about that. I mean, it's an obvious issue that wasn't addressed. It's going to be a big issue for the next governor. Governor Walker wants to expand the voucher program further statewide. Mary Burke wants to roll it back. That wasn't addressed. I mean, they found ways to address that, especially Mary Burke in her comments on other issues, perhaps, but that big issue, you know, that's something that will, you know, have to be, I guess, talked about in other forums.
And you wanted to ask a question about younger folks in the state, something about
the brain drain, as they call it.
Drain.
Yeah, we're losing a lot of our best and brightest. A new study earlier this year said that problem is increasing in the state. It needs to be addressed, and employers will tell you it needs to be addressed. Civic leaders will tell you that it needs to be addressed. I would have liked to have had the opportunity to ask them what they intend to do about that if they're elected. But,
does a debate of this kind, or do the two debates, make any difference to voters? It's a big question because you can be left with the impression that the people who watch these debates already feel pretty strongly about their candidate, that it essentially becomes a night where you're rooting for your guy or your woman, and that there's not necessarily a lot of changing of minds taking place. What's your take on that?
My take is, in a race that is this close, moving the needle even slightly might make a big difference. And because the debates draw so much attention to them, that maybe there are people who are listening to the candidates, hearing what they have to say, even though they're on their stump speech, even though they're sticking to their talking points, the same things they're saying in the ads. People might be tuning out the ads at this point, but they might be paying attention to what the candidates are saying during the debates.
Sure.
And it can change the discussion for a few days. And when you think about it, we've got a tied race. There's not that many days left before the election. Every day counts. And so when the governor says we don't have a jobs problem, even if he only has to spend a day or two explaining, well, here's what I meant, that doesn't let him talk about the message that he wants to be delivering. Or, you know, if a panelist asks about the minimum wage, and that's something that ends up getting discussed later on in newspaper editorial board meetings. So they can change the discussion when time is running out.
Give me your sense. I've got about 30 seconds left, so about 10 seconds from each of you. Just more of the same from here on out in this campaign? We see the ads, the same messaging, same themes. We can't really expect big changes, can we?
I wouldn't expect they'd want to take any risks at this late stage. I mean, their game plan has gotten them this close.
Yeah.
Right, and with the debates out of the way, there's nothing to force them to get off of their talking points. I think we're going to see more of the same, a lot more.
Kent Wainscott, WISN's political reporter, and Sean Johnson, the Capitol correspondent for Wisconsin Public Radio. It's good to have both of you on the program today.
Thanks.
Later on up front, I'll be talking with Republican in the 3rd Congressional District race, Tony Kurtz. He's challenging Democratic incumbent Ron Kind. But first, the race for Secretary of State. Many 74-year-olds are enjoying retirement, but Democratic incumbent Doug LaFollette is running for another term. I'll ask him why when Up Front continues.
Up Front with Mike Goucher, brought to you by the American Transmission Company and the Wisconsin Corn Growers Association.